Well, hello, and welcome to the Fisher Poetry Podcast, a showcase of prose, poetry, and song written and performed by those in the commercial fishing community, mostly. I'm your host, Brad. Thanks for joining us today. Today we have a special guest. Keith Wilson is a fisher poet who lives in Hailey, Idaho. Keith is here today to talk about his book, A Road Out of Naknek, Alaskan Salmon Fishing, Long Distance Running, and Life According to the Tide. Welcome to the podcast, Keith.
Thank you, Brad.
How are we doing today?
Good, good. I've always wondered what it felt like to be on open line. So I've kind of Bristol Bay, we have a radio program from KDLG called Open Line, and I was stopping myself from saying, "Am I on?" I always would say that because they're listening to themselves in the background and they don't realize there's a time delay.
Oh God, yeah.
Themselves on the radio, so
Yeah.
they say, "Am I on?"
Hello, or you can hear them on the radio in the background. And it starts echoing.
Right.
Yeah.
And now I've ended up saying it anyway. So am I on? I guess I am.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, so we'll start off here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Keith, and you currently live in Hailey, Idaho, but I understand that you come from a line. You're a kind of a second generation fisherman, right?
Yeah.
So tell
My,
us.
my yeah, my parents they moved up to Alaska in 1979, and I think they ended up in Naknek because it seemed like a good place to start my mom's career as a special ed teacher, and they ended up staying for 25 years or something like that. Um, my mom was the one that got curious about commercial fishing because that was the kind of community it was. Everybody commercial fishes there. And she got together with some friends that she worked with at school and she started the fishing operation. And my dad, he was working for Fish and Game at the time. And then she was pregnant with me, fishing in utero with me. And but then when I was born, my dad decided, no, I'm going to start fishing and quit this whole fish and game thing. And you teach, I fish, and we'll raise these kids. And then before they knew it, all these years had gone by. And which is kind of how my book starts.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah,
it starts
I was
with
going to
some
say in your book you have a really interesting description about how your mom and dad met and how they got together. Yeah, so they're both from Michigan, right? And they
both from Michigan, right?
both lived actually pretty close to each other, but never knew each other
Never knew
until
each
college, right? So,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
they grew up not that far away from each other, but met in the UP where I ended up going to school. And my logic behind that was because my parents are alumni. I got to pay in-state tuition being a resident of even being a resident of Alaska. And they said later on, well, that was the same reason they went there. It's as far away from home as they could get and still pay
Yeah,
state
I
tuition.
I grew up in Southwest Kansas, and I went to school at University of Kansas for my undergraduate work.
Okay.
And my logic was that it was as far as I could get away and still pay in-state tuition. so, so I know the feeling.
And I spent a year in Kansas as well.
Oh,
That's
really?
yeah,
Whereabouts?
in the smack center, as close to the center of the state as almost as you can get, in a
Oh,
place called Lucas, Kansas.
ah, yeah, Lucas. I've driven through Lucas on my way to KU multiple times. So,
So you've definitely seen the largest collector's plate in the world because that's
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot of those in Kansas. The largest collector's plate, the largest ball
All the time.
twine.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hidden treasures to be seen in Kansas. If only you go on the back roads to find them, the way
Yeah.
back roads. So, yeah, so you were virtually born on the fishing. You were had fishing in your blood from your mom from the get go,
Right.
and
Whether I wanted to or not,
mm-hmm,
it was there. It was in the blood.
mm-hmm. So you grew up in Naknek, or you let's see, you grew up and you changed locations on the island, right? You grew up was it originally in Naknek, and then you moved over to what was the name of that other community? Um,
No, I never lived in King Salmon. We did live, that's the funny thing about Naknek and King Salmon is it's almost indistinguishable where one begins and one ends.
mm-hmm,
And that's kind of the logic behind the title, A Road Out of Naknek is more of an abstract idea. Where does one begin and one end? But yeah, my senior year of high school, actually just a few days after my 18th birthday, we moved to a different house that was closer to King Salmon.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your about the book, and well, let's start off. Tell me about your life as a fisherman and how you. So I mean, I want to say that your mom, she didn't just give birth to you on the freeboards of the boat,
No, no, I was born in Anchorage in a hospital.
so though your mom started the fishing business, you really got into doing fishing along with your dad by that time, when because he was the main fisher person.
Well, my dad had, I mean, he definitely helped. He built their outhouse, and it's the outhouse that's still there.
Uh huh. They still
Um,
use it.
and oh yeah,
Yeah, that's right. Because what was it in the book? Your dad and mom talked about having running water because you had to run with the bucket from the
yeah,
stream, right?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
when they moved to Naknek, it was like it was still old school, back in the day kind of Naknek. They were living on a bank in a little shack, and um, yeah, no electricity, no running water. My dad's hair froze to the wall, to the headboard of the bed, and I still joke that's what happened to his hair. And I shouldn't talk because I'm losing my hair now too.
Yeah, so you started fishing at an early age,
Yeah,
and you mainly it sounds like you mainly fished for salmon,
right.
right?
Yeah, Bristol
And
Bay. The
Bristol Bay.
Naknek District is primarily a sockeye fishery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
started fishing with my dad when I was 11, and
Yeah.
it was less of a would you like to come fishing, even though that might have been how he phrased it. It was more of a you are going fishing.
So you worked for your dad for a while, for a long time. Then you went to college, and that's where you got. Well, you got in during high school. You were involved in some sports like basketball, but you really got into running. You discovered
Right.
wrestling and running were
Yeah.
your two natural
Yeah.
talents.
Right. And the whole running thing started because I was trying to get in shape for wrestling, and then kept I just kept running. And that's a lot of the book. A lot of the book, as you've probably discovered, is not about fishing. Every other chapter is about fishing, and the other alternating chapters are about life moving on, and running being a big part of that.
Hmm.
And a lot of it is what they don't have to do with each other, and of course everything that they do have to do with each other.
Hmm.
And some of these things I didn't even realize until after the book was published and people were reading it and saying, oh yeah, I mean, I see that the connection there. I said, oh yeah, I wish I'd thought of that while you wrote it.
Yeah, my sense reading the book was it's a lot about evolution, so to speak. I mean,
Sure.
you start off the book and talking about the natural world and tides and how life develops, and then you also started interspersing that with your own personal stories, and I thought that was a very good way to kind of switch between the two, chapter by chapter, and I mean, was that your sense when after you finished it and you read it, or did you know that at the time that you were trying to write it kind of like that?
No, that came in later. Really, my writing process is a lot of my processes work, which drive my wife crazy. I don't do things in order. I don't have an order. I don't have a very good. I'm not efficient at doing things. I do the part that I feel like, and then put it to the side and pick up another part and work on it as I feel like it. But as I started collecting more and more material, then I started to see this pattern that I started putting together, and some of it forcefully, some of it naturally. But I hope that it comes off that it's more natural than forceful. That was the biggest struggle of the whole writing process.
Hmm. Yeah, it does. It does. It comes across very. Um, uh, I don't want to say sequential, but it's a natural flow from one
Sure.
section to the next, and it's easy to switch between the two. You know, it's
Right.
so I
And you,
really I enjoyed that part about when I was reading it. So speaking of
yeah,
which,
you
so
talk about
go ahead.
you mentioned the evolution, and I think about the writing process itself was evolution. At one point, somebody suggested, "Hey, this present tense really works well. Why don't you go with that?" And now all of the chapters that are about fishing or me being back in Naknek are present tense, where the others are past tense.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
continuous part.
yeah. So let's see a photo. You have a copy of your book there, so folks can take a look at
Right.
it. So yep,
This is
Road
the
Out.
hardcover version. Has some sticky notes in there for sections I might read today. Um, but it looks like that. This is the back cover. If you open it like this, you can see it's actually a map of Bristol Bay, Naknek, and the Huijack River.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. Well, why don't you read some of your favorite passages out of the book, and I'm just going to
Yeah,
go on mute here
absolutely.
while you do that, and just take it away whenever you're ready.
Sure. How about I start with just reading that first paragraph?
That's good.
Okay. The tide waits for no one. I don't know how many times I've heard Dad say it, but he's right. It's both time and tide, as the adage goes, that stayeth for no man. But I've learned that time and tide are synonymous, and they wait for no woman, child, flower, fur bearer, or fish either. I was never a stellar student, but I paid attention to the interesting parts. And as I understand it, gravity between the sun, our planet, and the moon pulls the ocean in a rhythm as reliable as night and day, summer and winter, or spring and fall. It creates ebbs and floods in a pattern that the rotation of a clock, the breath in a pair of lungs, or the beating of a heart could never match. The tide was turning long before life existed, and it will keep turning long after we're gone. And I think if any part of the book, that's the part that I spent the most time on poring over, trying to getting those words right. Shall I read another part?
Absolutely. Take it away.
Okay. So, and I have quite a few just short excerpts. ready to read. A couple of them are a little bit longer, but this is another short one. And in the hardcover edition, this is starting toward the bottom of page 50. And this is me as a little kid with my parents and my sister actually on the boat, learning to count. 1, a fish flies from my mom's orange glove. It lands into a big bag tied between 2 metal bars across the skiff. Mom and Dad call the bag a brailer. 2, Dad tosses another one. His gloves are blue and his fish is in the air before the first one lands. 3, I shout as the next one is on its way. And I keep counting until the numbers are too high for me to remember. Mom and Dad start shouting them to help me. 11, 12, 13, I repeat. When Erica is old enough to count, she repeats the numbers with me, but I think she learns them quicker. Adults say I do well in school, but she does better. She knows how to talk to adults. She knows how to get more peanut butter and jelly on her sandwich. She and I stand in a gray plastic tote and a blue plaid picnic blanket that we crawl beneath when it gets cold, when it rains, or when the waves start splashing over the sides. Mom and Dad fold a tarp over us. The tote is shoved between 2 ribs. And that's another short excerpt. This one's a little bit longer. And this is starts with the radio that I was mentioning earlier when we started. And this starts on page 70 in the hardcover edition. This is the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and King Salmon with an announcement for commercial fishermen in the Naknek district. The words from KDLG are surrounded by soft static, and they hold as much tension as a net when the tide is running the hardest. Conversations end in the middle of a boatyard. A game of cards in a cabin comes to a standstill. An afternoon of trying to start a stubborn motor stops. Aside from the voice on the radio announcing our fate, Naknek pauses. The time is 3 p.m. and the date is Monday, June 24th, 1996. In the Naknek district through 2 p.m. today, Naknek River escapement was 95,000 sockeye for a cumulative escapement of 111,000. The Kvichak River escapement was 264 sockeye for a cumulative of 2,400. The run is here, and Dad scribbles the numbers down in his Captain Jack's Tide and Current almanac. The fishing districts of Bristol Bay are some of the last sustainable commercial fisheries in the world, and they have remained sustainable with the regulation of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game since the 1950s. An opener is decided based on escapement. An escapement is measured by sample fishing prediction and someone standing on a counting tower up the river deciding our fate. Then the decision is relayed to the radio station. The Naknek district will open to set gill net gear for an 8-hour period from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. Tuesday, June 25th. Drift fishermen in the Naknek district should stand by at 9 a.m. Wednesday, June 26th. I hope that section for at least Bristol Bay fishermen really brings reality to it. Let me think here. Here's a paragraph beginning a chapter on page 87 of the hardcover edition. And this is as I'm getting older, no longer a little kid joining mom and dad aboard. This is me, later into my career, so to speak, maybe a teenager. It's not the wind or the waves, but the sound of the motor that wakes me. It's slack tide, and the ebb is about to start. The fishing seasons are starting to run together. I could be 13 or 18 right now. Either way, the motor starting means it's time to check the nets. The skiff's wooden ribs are pressed against my own ribs while I lay on my side, but a raincoat, life jacket, chest waders, sweatshirt, and long johns soften the pressure. My head is propped against the anchor, and my boots are pressed against the bulkhead in the bow. Both legs are asleep, so I reach the gunwale of the skiff and pull up my cold carcass. Dreaming, I didn't notice the blood recruited away from my fingers and toes to heart and lungs. Awake, I feel the numbness and cold in my limbs. It's an involuntary function of my body to stay alive. I learned in school that if I can shut off the shivering, I'm fine. I can, but I don't want to because it provides an illusion of warmth. I'm alive, and I can reach down to the buoy just fine. And let me think here. How about I read the section that I read for Fisher Poets, but instead of leaving with a spoiler for those of you that listened, I'll go on a little bit further. And this is actually an event that happened about 10 years ago. So this is a little more recent. Okay, let's see. Yeah. There is a siren on the other side of the vessel. I hear it over the wind and waves and men shouting. Luke freezes. The crane operator disappears. The attention of the crew is on the skiff on the other side of the tender, where two men have gone overboard. The skiff remains lopsided. It rocks and splashes in the waves, and splashes into the stern are bigger now. Hey, Dad yells up to anyone who can hear. We got to get more fish out of here. We're going to swamp too. The scale from the crane is still lowered into our skiff, and I start clipping the next brailer to it. Luke is frozen. Luke, I say, brailer, come on. I can't hear what Dad and the skipper are shouting back and forth through the wind, but Dad starts untying the stern line. Keith, he shouts, untie. Skipper says we're going into calmer water. I release us. Then water dumps into the stern. Hey, we're sinking, Dad yells. We're sinking. Fish float toward me. The motor is underwater. I've untied, but the line is still in my hands, sliding through them. I tighten my grip and feel it burn through my gloves. I'm bailing, Luke says. I know he doesn't mean the bucket when he crawls to the side and climbs aboard the tender. Metal crashes against metal, splashes between vessel tower above me. Waves keep dumping into the skiff. My hands burn as they tighten harder around the line as I slip into the dark. In my peripheral vision, I see Dad climb aboard the tender too. I'm alone in the skiff, drifting away, dead fish floating against my hips. Dad and Luke's voices are somewhere in the lights. Luke says, screw the skiff, Keith, get up here. Dad says, damn it, that's my son. I keep drifting into the darkness, and for a moment the waves are silent, almost still. My mind must have gone black. I don't remember tying the tangle into the net, into the mess on the floor, holding the skiff against the current. But I look down and it's there. It's not a bowline or a keg knot or even a granny knot. It's a wad of line woven back and forth and around itself in some kind of mess that's somehow holding. I've done what I can, and now I need to get out of this skiff. I step toward the tender, but my ankle is wrapped in the line. My face splashes into the floor. I taste salt. Water pours down my neck. The bail bucket floats by me and disappears. I flap and kick, but it's futile. The more I move, the more the line tightens. Water keeps pouring toward me. Water is all I see. Now I realize, surrounded in the dark, that I've come face to face with the tide. I know it won't wait, but I can't help but whisper, not now. With one jerk of my foot, my shoe flies away and disappears. I crawl to the side and the crew lifts me aboard. From the deck of the tender, I watch the skiff sink and flip. The fish are gone. The skiff flips again and again, bouncing in the waves. Everything is gone. The food box, the toolbox, the metal slides we used to pull the net across the bow. For a moment, I see the empty gas tanks floating behind the stern. Then they disappear into the dark with everything else. I feel empty. Dad yells, no. Luke remains a statue. I fall to my knees. The net hanging from the crane is a wadded mess of lines and ruined web. The other net is behind it, and my muscles clench with the thought of the splish splash of another fish getting caught in it. Somehow the skiff doesn't go anywhere. The skipper barks orders, and the crew works like they'd practiced this 1,000 times to tie the skiff tight against the tender. Okay, and I feel like that's a good stopping point for that section. I have one more that I have ready to read. This is more of one of those less of an action sequence and more of a contemplative exploration, I guess. Keith, Luke says. He fishes his own operation now next to ours. His skiff is tied to us, waiting with us for the tide. How much time do you think you've spent sitting in the skiff, waiting for the tide? Like I start in my life? It's a good question. How much time sitting in the bow of a skiff, my foot on an anchor, staring at the corks for a bob or a splash, contemplating existence, life, death, and the universe, have I spent waiting for the tide? It could be 3 months. It could be years. There's some statistic about the average American's cumulative time spent at traffic lights waiting for green. But most of my life has been in a place without traffic lights. You're like a piece of driftwood, Luke says, laughing, just floating around wherever the tide takes you. I guess he's right. Driftwood doesn't resemble its original tree. I'm shorter than average, and I have what people call a year-round tan. Luke looks just like Dad. He's tall and blue-eyed. He loves hunting and fishing, and he's competent at handiwork. He would have fit in with our Viking ancestors. We all originate from the same roots, like multiple rivers from the same headwaters. We branched apart in all directions. We continue to branch away from each other in smaller streams and tiny twigs, reaching farther and farther away from the trunk. But sometimes those branches twist and intertwine. It's why our stories are intertwined more than we realize, even after they fall and drift with the tide. Odin breathed life into driftwood and brought life to Ask and Embla, the first people. As they multiplied, he watched people through his messenger ravens. Then at Ragnarok, the demise of all people and gods, just a tree and a serpent were left unscathed. In a new beginning, Adam and Eve tasted the tree's forbidden fruit, tempted by a serpent. Their descendant Noah sent a raven from his ark as a messenger. The raven never returned. He became the trickster character in Native American mythology. Maybe the Bible never resonated with me because it never mentions the tide. But maybe it's just lost in translation. In the beginning, the ocean covered the surface of our planet, and the entire ocean was murky with particulates. There was no light below the surface and almost no oxygen. Then, as the tide repeatedly turned upon the surface of the ocean, it cleared and allowed light to penetrate further depths. Meanwhile, land strengthened to a solid, firm structure, or firmamentum, in Latin, as a barrier between parts of the ocean. Maybe Jesus didn't walk on water, but a mudflat. Maybe Moses and the Israelites arrived at the Red Sea at the end of the ebb, and the Egyptian army arrived just before the flood. Maybe the story of Noah's Ark took place over the course of 6 hours. Maybe the firmament is the shoreline. Maybe God is the tide. The Anglo-Saxon word teed developed from tedi of the ancient Germanic tribes. Tedi developed from the daitai of the Proto-Indo-European language. Perhaps its similarity to deity is no coincidence. Time and tide are unchangeable, inevitable, and unavoidable. Time and tide stayeth for no man. Time and tide are divine. And I think I'll stop there.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Keith. That's
Yeah, thank you.
those are wonderful. Really, really nice job. Sorry, I was listening, especially the last two parts. I'm like, no, you got to keep talking about. I know you lived. I know you survived, but God,
Right.
damn it. Stop right there. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, and I went further than I did with Fisher Poets. I stopped even earlier. So,
Oh well, they only gave you so long
right. Yeah.
to talk. Um, so, uh, this is your first book, right?
This is my first book. Yeah.
And have you got another one cooking away?
I have material. We'll put it that way. I'll have
Uh
material. I don't know if I'm getting any better at organizing my material, but
huh.
some of it's existing. It's starting to take
It
shape. We'll
comes
see.
comes a little bit here, a little bit there,
Right.
and when it's right, it'll appear and out of magic, right? Like magic.
Magic. Yeah, the
Yeah.
tide will bring it.
And then what's next? What's next on the plate for you
What's next is
besides
that
being a
this,
father?
so my book ends, the events of the book take place until I'm about 32. I'm 37 right now.
Hmm.
And this is my dad's last year fishing. He's turning 70 this summer. He
Wow.
always said that he wanted to fish until he's 70. Actually, how it goes is every year my mom would ask him, well, how long, much longer? How much longer are you going to do this? And he'd say 10 more years. And the next year he'd say 10 more years. And then until he finally said 9 more years. uh, so what's next for us is we my wife and I are buying a new operation, and this is going to
In
be an
Naknek?
interesting summer in Naknek. Yeah, so I'm heading up to Naknek a little bit later than I normally do. I'll fish the last season with my dad, and that'll be his last season before I'm dad, and the story continues. I don't know
Hmm.
if I'm going to be fishing. I'm 70, but I'm not going to rule it out.
So yeah, I congratulate your dad on his long career.
Yeah.
And but who knows? You will have your young
Oh, he's
child
always
be
going to be a present.
yeah.
He's going to be.
Yeah, he'll get it. He's probably looking forward to teaching your child to fish and to
Yeah.
he wants to get you. And are you going to get them going along in the same way you've been? If they like doing it, you're gonna
If
encourage
they
it.
like doing it, and for the record, my dad has said, anytime you want out of it, like I've,
Yeah, yeah,
like I said, I'm 37 years old. I don't have to keep doing this with my dad. I choose to, and
yeah,
I've gotten to know him, through my adulthood in a way that I think a lot of sons don't get to know their fathers. So
yeah,
if my son chooses to do that, great. If he doesn't, that's fine. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. You gotta do what you love, right? Not
yeah,
not just because you have
absolutely.
to do it. So. Well, so where can people find your book at? How can they
Um,
get a copy of it?
the easiest way to get it's on Amazon, but between me and the listeners, uh, you can find it also on my website, wilsonswildsalmon.com. Also, if you find me through social media, through email, whatever, if you contact me directly, I will send you a signed copy. If you order it through Wilson's Wild Salmon, you'll end up with a signed copy.
Great, great.
Yeah,
Well, Keith, I want to thank you for being on here today and
yeah. Thank
for
you.
sharing your time with us and giving us a little bit of taste of this delightful book. And I would encourage readers to get a hold of Keith and to get a copy for yourselves because it's a great read. And any whether you're a fisher poet or a fisherman or not, it's a really good story. So thank you again, Keith, and
Yeah,
we
thank you for
appreciate it.
having me on. This has been
Okay,
fun.
well that's it. This one's in the tote. For more information on the Fisher Poets Gathering, go to fisherpoets.org. Please also check out our videos on the Fisher Poetry channel on YouTube. We're always looking for fisher poets like Keith to come on the show and share their craft with the fisher poet community. If you'd like to appear on the show, please send me an email to the FisherPoetry Podcast at gmail.com. We can also be found on Twitter at the FPPcast and at the Fisher Poetry Podcast page on Facebook. Many thanks to those of you who have made a donation in support of our efforts. If you'd like to support us, you can also make a donation via either our podcast host, Anchor, or on Patreon. Links to all of these are provided in the podcast description. The Fisher Poetry Podcast is written and produced by me, Brad Wortman. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to haul the latest episodes into your net. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.